All righty, friends. Glad to have you with me today. I see some folks are loading in here, and we will have this conversation today. Today, I'm speaking with Kelly Shackleford. He's got a great resume here. I don't know if any of it is true, Kelly, but I'll share some of this. What I've got here. Kelly is president and CEO of First Liberty Institute, largest legal firm in the nation dedicated exclusively to protecting religious freedom for all Americans. And I'll let him explain more about that later. He's a sought after speaker and commentator. He has argued before the Supreme Court. I want to ask him about that today. He's testified before the House and Senate. But Kelly, I want to thank you and welcome you to this time today. We're just going to talk. I want you to, during this time, tell people about First Liberty. And if you're out there, folks, and you have a question you want to ask Kelly, you can send it by the Q&A. Kelly, first of all, how in the world did you become involved in the legal world, in law? What was the impetus behind that?
That really goes back to when I was in high school. I realized my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking. And I thought, well, I either need to be a pastor or a lawyer. And people said, isn't that kind of a God or Satan choice to be a pastor or a lawyer? And yeah, I went to my youth pastor and said, here's what I'm seeing. And he said, if you're called to be a minister, it's a wonderful calling. He said, but I will say this, I know a lot of Christian pastors, but boy, we sure could use some more Christian lawyers. And as I analyzed my DNA, I realized I would probably do better at dispensing justice rather than mercy, and so I'd probably make a better lawyer. And went to law school. Still had a heart for ministry. Spent a lot of my time, even at law school, leading the discipleship ministry for the college students. And got out, clerked for a federal judge. You do that for 1 year. You sort of research, write opinions, help the judge. And then if you get one of those jobs, I mean, you kind of name your job at that point with any of the law firms. It's just a unique experience to have. And I just didn't have a passion I felt like I'd suffocate if I went and worked at a regular law firm. I just feel like that's what the Lord was telling me to do. And I remember thinking, in my little clerk's office in the federal court building, well, what do you want to do? I thought, well, I'm supposed to use my legal skills because the Lord's shown me that, but I want to help pastors and churches and religious freedoms and our founding principles. And I even like to go to seminary part-time if I could. And I laughed because there was no job like that. And 2 weeks later, two partners in big law firms, guys I'd never met, called me out of the blue, took me to lunch, said, look, we started donating our time for religious freedom, and we're now getting so many calls, it's hurting our ability to make a living. So we were wondering, would you be willing to come on, do cases, help pastors, churches, religious freedoms, and our founding principles, and you can even go to seminary part-time if you want to. And that was 31 years ago. And now First Liberty is the largest nonprofit legal group in the country that all we do is religious freedom. So it's one of those things where God created an organization that didn't exist and had me be a part of that from step one. And I just took it one step at a time. There's a scripture in Hebrews that's always hit me pretty good. And that's Abraham, obeyed God and went to a distant land, even though he didn't know where he was going. And that's kind of what I feel like with me. I was like, I didn't know what I was doing, but I just kind of took it one step at a time. The Lord's been very gracious to be one step ahead of me every step of the time.
You know what? Abraham, lots of children. And in some ways, it seems like you've had lots of children as a lot of attorneys have participated with what First Liberty is doing. He's multiplied your offspring. So
Yep.
First Liberty, did that law firm initially, was that in the Texas area? Was that in Dallas, or where was that?
Originally, I started a group in Dallas, in the Texas, and actually it was just a state group. And then I was a part of a national effort. I was in charge of a region. And then I ended up leaving all of that and starting my own group, which is First Liberty, that now started Texas and then went national. We're winning we have a method that I can talk about in a little bit, that's different from everybody else. And the result of this method and God's favor is that we win a higher clip of our cases than any group in the country. And as we started to do that in Texas, people said, hey, we need your help in these other states. And so at that point, we realized God was really calling us to go national and to do this all over the country. And since we did that, we just really grew pretty fast. I mean, the need's great, and people, there's so many people out there that want to be involved in protecting religious freedom. And, you know, if we don't do what we do, there's no way for them to actually connect to it. And so it's a privilege to sort of be building this army that's growing and growing and growing, that's going to fight and preserve religious freedom in our country, not only for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren.
I'll have you repeat this later on, but if people, even while we're chatting, where do they go to learn more about First Liberty online? What link to that?
Easy, just spell it out first, the word first, liberty.org. And firstliberty.org, and there's endless information. You can see the cases. You can see we've had 10 cases during COVID. We've won 10. I mean, we've won all of them with the churches we've represented. We've, you can find information on what your rights are. I mean, all kinds of things. Or if you just need help, you can call or send an email. So firstliberty.org is where they can find. In fact, they can find the interviews and things that we've done with Dinesh D'Souza and Sean Fout right there in California, the worship leader.
Yeah.
We had him on. We're actually going to be out there, I think, on Sunday. We have a big truck that's a First Liberty truck where we do video and stuff on the inside, and we're going to be there for that big prayer rally outside the Capitol. So we've got a lot of people that can go and look at any of these interviews, Ted Cruz, you name it, where we talk about religious freedom and kind of what's going on in the country. So lots of stuff there for people to look at if they want to look at, whether it's a case, their rights, or just interviews and things that we've done.
Okay, so First Liberty, was it 1979 when you started? Is that the year, or do I have that?
Gosh, I don't even know the official year that all the underlying organization, but really we really launched in a major way in 1997.
That's, yeah.
1997 was the real official launch. Technically the 501c3 organization that we're under started in 1970, but we dramatically changed it through the years to where, boom, 1997, it became First Liberty and religious freedom and all the stuff that we're doing.
Okay, you say religious freedom. Are you just about Christians, or tell the folks what First Liberty does?
No, I mean, religious freedom is either there for everybody or it's there for nobody. And so some of our most significant cases we have are Jewish synagogues, for instance. In fact, we have one case there in California, a synagogue that I think we've now had 13 lawsuits to try to harass this synagogue. I mean, it's just incredible. It's Abad of Irvine, right outside of LA. And I think we just had a hearing. I don't even know what the result of it is yesterday, to dismiss it, to hopefully be rid of the 13th different lawsuit. I mean, these people have been so harassed. We've got the big synagogue case in New York, in city of Airmont. This is a city that was formed. It was proven in court that they were, in the past lawsuit, they were formed for the specific purpose of getting rid of the Orthodox Jews from their city. And so they have zoning regulations that basically tell you what percentage of your home you can use if you hold a religious meeting. And then that's bad enough, right? That's ridiculous. But they make it worse because you have to actually apply to the city and show that you're only using a certain percentage of your home, because if you use over that, you're in violation of the ordinance, and you have to pay the city attorney's fees for approving your permit. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. So we've got a number of synagogues, a new one in Houston. So yeah, I mean, I've represented Orthodox Jews, Catholics, Protestants, the Falun Gong. I mean, you name it. Religious freedom is either there for everybody or it's there for nobody, because it's about whether the government should be able to tell anybody what their religion can be.
Okay. I'm amazed how many Christians or followers of Jesus do not really understand separation of church and state. Can you just give a real quick, explanation of just what that means and help people understand that?
Yeah. Let me step back. I'll give you the basic deal first is why is religious freedom important, period? And to a believer, they might think that they get it. And most people get one version of it, which is, well, heck, it's very important that we be able to share our faith, that people can have their lives redeemed and their lives changed, and that's all true. But there's another element to it that our founders understood, and it's why they call it our first freedom. It's why we're called First Liberty, and that is that they understood that if you lose religious freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms, because it's the first freedom, because it's sort of at the very core that if an oppressive type of a totalitarian regime comes into power, the one thing it cannot allow are citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So the first flashpoint for that type of, totalitarianism is always going to be religious freedom. It's going to be these believers who bow their knee to Jesus and not to the government. And if you lose at that point, then you'll lose everything, political freedom, everything else. We have people come up to us from all over the world as I'm speaking around the country and say, I'm from Romania, I'm from Czechoslovakia, I'm from all these other places. And they say, I think that what you guys are doing is the most important thing anybody's doing in this country. And I'm not religious. I just saw this happen in my country. And they'll give me a check, to support the organization, because they understand their freedoms. And so they know how important it is. And if you lose religious freedom in they said, I saw it happen in my land. I mean, I hear this a lot. They took down the Christian symbols and the religious symbols got taken down, and immediately the secular symbols go up. And the new God is government. So people need to understand sort of the centrality. And by the way, during the pandemic, if you didn't know this, you should know it now. What is the major fight when you have oppressive sort of totalitarian type moves going by governors and mayors? The fight is religious freedom. It's the churches. And what's amazing is every time we've won one of these lawsuits in any of these states, within days, the businesses are allowed to open too. So the churches lead the way. Religious freedom always leads the way. Separation of church and state is a phrase that was used by Thomas Jefferson 20 years after the Constitution was written and the Bill of Rights was written. So it really has zero to do with, people think it's in the Constitution. It's not. Mm-hmm. What it actually means is something that Christians would agree with if they interpret it properly. It's that God created certain institutions. He created the institution of the family, of the church, of the government. And we don't want the government to be telling the church what to do. That's inappropriate. And so that's essentially what it means, but that's not how people use it. What happened is people took this phrase and they used it to try to say, anywhere government is, religion cannot be. And so it's a way to sort of push religion to the corners of society, because government's everywhere now. And so, but the great thing about this is just a term that people use. It's not a legal term. And the legal term, what's in the Constitution, is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or protecting the free exercise thereof. Those are the religion clauses. What did Congress mean by saying, what did they mean by saying we don't want there to be an establishment of religion? Almost everybody knows what that is. We don't want there to be a national church like the Church of England that then would take away the freedoms of everybody else to worship the way they want to worship. And, so the Constitution was fine. The problem is back in the 1960s, early 70s with the liberal Warren Court, they reinterpreted the Establishment Clause to mean things like, they say, well, it really means like separation of church and state. It means offended observer status, which means you can now bring lawsuits if you're just offended. And so you can't bring lawsuits normally because you're offended. I mean, you have to show an actual, injury, but only with religion. If you're offended, you can bring a lawsuit, right? So this is why our whole lives we've always had this weird scenario of the government almost being hostile to religion, and people get offended and they bring lawsuits and shut down religious symbols or Ten Commandments monuments or nativity scenes. And so the good news is that we just really begun the major change away from that and back to the Constitution. We had a big case that just went to the Supreme Court that we just won about a year and a half ago called the American Legion case, the Bladesbird cross case. And this is a cross that was up for 100 years almost, that was put up by mothers who lost their sons in World War I and the American Legion. And a lawsuit was filed many years later when the government took over the property because it was right outside of DC, and just for health and safety of driving roads around it, they took over. But they left the monument there, wanted to respect the monument. But then the American humanists come along and say, oh, you can't have this monument that's a big cross on government land, and goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And, they were going to tear it down. I mean, the lower court said unconstitutional. One of the judges, this is an Obama appointee judge, in the oral argument said, well, why don't we just cut the arms off the cross? Because that way we won't have to tear it down, but nobody will be offended. So we're like, I don't think so. We're going to the Supreme Court. And we could have won. We felt like there's no way this Supreme Court is going to tear down this cross. That, number one, it would be horrific. But number two, it would mean you got to go into Arlington Cemetery and start tearing down all the crosses and Stars of David there. You'd be, the religious cleansing and sandblasting would just be beyond our wildest beliefs all over the country. So we thought, rather than go for the sort of the bunt single win, let's go for the grand slam. Let's get back to what the Constitution really meant. And that old case called Lemon that they were using for all this separation of church and state and offended observer and all this, we've helped get some good judges and justices on the court. Let's see if we can't get this overturned, and let's get back to the Constitution. And we have made those arguments, and we won that case 7-2 as far as the cross is not going down. But more importantly, I think we won the argument about what the Constitution really means 5-4. And so the justices said, we're not following this Lemon case. And what's amazing is what's been happening since then, Steve, because now other cases are coming down, lower court cases, district court, federal court of appeals, and they're all saying everything has now changed. So the way I look at it is, for 50 years, maybe even, at least 50 years, our country's been going in this direction of the government being hostile to religion. We just turned. We're now going the other direction. The hostility to religion is over. And we still got to build out what all that means. But I think that was a major force for bad in our country, this sort of anti-religious atmosphere. And I think the founders would have been appalled at this. And that's all beginning to change. Yeah, we're at the beginning of something really, really new and really good as far as religious freedom goes.
Okay, I want to come back in a second, because you said hostility towards the church is changing and so forth, and yet what we're seeing in some churches right now, so I want to come back to that in a second. Yeah. Tell people how First Liberty works. I know, but do you have this huge contingent of attorneys all over the country? And how do you tell us the strategy of First Liberty?
Yeah, the model we use is very different. And that is, if you're to look at a nonprofit, legal nonprofits, I don't care if they're left-wing or right-wing or what their issue is, the environment or property rights or you name it, same model. Raise as much money as you can raise for your nonprofit. Use that money to hire as many attorneys as you can. Put them in an office in Los Angeles or New York, DC, wherever. Fly them around the country to do as many of those cases as you can do. That's not our model. Our model is, there's all these people of faith who went to law school because They wanted to stand for what was right. They wanted to be a lawyer. They wanted to ride in and stand for righteousness. And 30 years later, these are now the best litigators at the best law firms in the country. And they've done honorable work for their clients, but they've never gotten to do a case for the kingdom. And so we come in and we say, look, if we give you everything you need, are you willing to give your time on one of these cases? For the first time in their life, all their talent, all their training, everything they've learned for the first time is lined up with their faith.
Wow.
They've never felt that before. They've never felt that perfect an alignment in their life. And it's kind of unfair, but we now know we have them for the rest of their lives as one of our volunteer attorneys. They got to do another one. And they are the big partners, so they give cover to all the younger attorneys, and they get to taste what it's like. So if you were to go through the top 100 law firms in the United States, you find most of the law firms don't just donate their time with us. They literally will fight each other over who gets to donate their time with us in a case. And I originally did this, Steve, because I thought we get a lot more bang for our buck. You know, we can, you know, number one, it's a ministry to them, because so many of these people are being a litigator especially can really wear on you. You know, it's like you're a plumber, and every time you screw in a pipe, somebody's unscrewing the pipe, right? I mean, it can wear. And so for them to finally get to work on something they love, it's great for them. But my original reason was really, I knew we could get bang for our buck that way. And sure, average case, we spend every 10,000 we spend, we get 60,000 donated. So we're literally multiplying God's resources at 6 to 1. But the thing I did not count on was the results of this different method, which is, if you watch legal nonprofits, they're fighting big monsters, government, major forces, et cetera. They're trying to change something. They're trying to do something. If they're really, really good, they might win 40% of their cases. We've now had 20 years in a row that we have won over 90% of our cases every single year. And it's because of God's favor, number one, but number two, because this is his method. This is his body. So when we have a case in Montana, our attorney lives in Montana, is with the biggest law firm in Montana. When he goes into court and look at the judge, they were in, like, you know, first grade together, right? So, you know, you can only do this if you're the body of Christ. We have the best litigators in the country, and they're everywhere, and they're all waiting for their turn. And so every time we have a case, we put together teams in those areas, and they're dream teams. They're, you know, we'll have 6 people on a case that all charge over $1,000 an hour. But again, it's all pro bono. People would never pay for that if they were paying, but these people are saying, you have got to let me be involved in this case. And so it's just awesome, because what I love about it is you have people who are in need, and the body of Christ is coming to them. You have these people who need to give their gifts for the body that are getting to exercise their gifts. And the result of this beautiful combination are these victories that protect everybody in the body of Christ. I mean, so it's just such a blessing all the way. Everybody gets blessed. You know, these, like, let's take one of our newest cases, a blind woman who has been banned from sharing the gospel in a public park for 2 years. She hands out a copy of the Gospel of John. Could Gail Blair ever afford a team of the top attorneys in the country? Of course not, right? But you know what? She's blessed because she has a powerful team with her, right? But those attorneys are blessed because they get to represent Gail Blair. And then the result of this is, I believe, when we get a precedent, that's going to bless everybody. And so that's our method. And we have a high win rate because nobody else does it this way. I'll tell you what, you know who really does it this way? Our major corporations. If you're Ford Motor Company and you're in Detroit, Michigan, and you get sued in Los Angeles, do you send your Detroit attorneys to Los Angeles? Of course you don't. You get the biggest, best law firm in Los Angeles that know those judges, that know, but none of the nonprofits do this. And so what happens in every other case is, it's our cases. It's one of the most powerful law firms in the country, one of the most powerful lawyers in the country that know the judges, that know the local practice. And on the other side from us is either some nonprofit attorney from out of state or for some government attorney. So you know what? We totally have them outmanned. Add that to the fact that this country was built on religious freedom and the laws protect that. We should win 90% of our cases. So the good news is we're having to fight a lot more cases than we used to. I mean, I think 8-9 years ago, we had 48 cases. This last year, we had over 300. The attacks are great, but we're winning. We just have to be willing to stand up. And when we do, everybody gets blessed in the body. These attorneys love it. The people that stand love it, and it blesses everybody else as well.
So you're saying in these cities, having that relationship with the judges and so forth, that's a leg up automatically when you go in. They maybe their kids went to school together or they have dinner together, whatever.
That's right. That's a huge advantage. I mean, everybody knows that's why the corporations do what they do. Every businessman who has a big organization and has a litigator around the country, that's how they do it. You know, I'm in Dallas, Texas right now. If somebody from California had business interest in Dallas and they got sued in Dallas, that would be nuts to send California attorneys to Dallas. They'd go, "Where are your boots?" Right? I mean, you walk into some of these courts, you're expected to have black boots and a suit on. So, I mean, there's juries too. Those juries are from that area. Okay. You don't want somebody coming in from out of state. You want somebody who knows the practice, who knows the community, and who also knows the judges. You know, what are the things that are really persuasive to that judge? What are the things that aren't? You know, what are the things that judge is not going to like an attorney doing? All those kinds of things, of course, are helpful. And again, the judges also have, people come and argue in front of them, and they don't know, do they have credibility? Is this person telling me the truth in their argument? If they're from law firms that have proven what they stand for and how they operate and what professionalism, the judges know who those are, right? So when you come with one of the top litigators at one of the top law firms in the world, the judge knows who that is, that makes a difference. Because those top litigators aren't top litigators because they lie. Because you lie and your credibility is blown and you're not going to convince anybody of anything. Yeah. You've got to be truthful.
One of my good friends, you got emotional.
The light off. Okay. Light went off.
It's a conspiracy.
It is. The ACLU has tapped into our line.
One of my good friends here in Los Angeles works for Gibson Dunn. And
there you go.
When I told him that he goes, "Oh man," he goes, "I love what they do." And so, I mean, he knows. And of course, that Gibson Dunn is
we work with them on, I'm trying to remember, I think the Mojave Desert cross case, where outside the Mojave Desert, there was a memorial that was put up a long time ago by World War I vets. And it was a cross in the middle of the desert. And the ACLU filed a lawsuit because they were highly offended that in the middle of 2 million acres of desert that you could find a cross there. I guess they were worried that the rattlesnakes and bees would be converted. I don't know. And so they filed this lawsuit to have this torn down. And we ended up representing the people who put up that cross. And Gibson Dunn, I'm pretty sure, was with us on that case. So, I mean, that's what these big, I think they're one of the top 5 law firms, in the world. And it's funny because they love working on these cases. I mean, this is meaningful. This is why they went to law school. So it's fun. And then meanwhile, the guy we were representing, Henry Sandos, just a crusty old guy who lived out in the desert, who he made a promise. The last guy alive who put that cross up said, "Henry, after I die, will you watch over this?" These guys weren't religious. They just wanted to put something up to remember those who died in World War I, their buddies. And this guy made a promise, Henry Sandos. And, when they told him they were going to take the cross down, he said, "No, you're not." I won't use the language he actually said, but it was not only no, and then it got worse. and for that guy to have as his attorneys, like a team of lawyers from Gibson Dunn, along with the First Liberty lawyers, no way in the world. I mean, that could only happen in America. I mean, it really could only happen in America. So it's fun to watch these cases. It takes heroes that stand up for our freedoms, and then it takes these great people who come and give their time. And the result is something I think it makes you proud to be an American to watch. I encourage people, go to the website and look at some of the cases. Just look at some of the videos. See these people. They're standing all alone usually, and they need prayer. They're in a battle, a big spiritual battle, in addition to the battle that's going on. I can't tell you how many times, if you stand up, half of the people, even from your own church, will turn their back on you because they don't like controversy. And so these are great heroes that are standing for the faith, and we need to pray for them. We need to lift them up. But I love to see how God blesses them for their faithfulness, and really blesses a lot of other people because of their faithfulness.
Tell the people, without getting too deep, just so I'm sure there's some people going, oh, that case, I didn't know First Liberty was involved. Oh, that case. Tell people just briefly some of the cases that they might know about, but they didn't know that First Liberty was involved.
Well, let's start out with your area, the Mount Soledad Cross, out in San Diego area, the Mojave Desert Cross out there. Right up north of you, the Coach Kennedy case in Bremerton, Washington, the coach who was fired for going to a knee to say a prayer after the football game by himself. Of course, the Bladesbird Cross case we just had at the Supreme Court. I think a lot of people have heard about the Sweet Cakes case in Oregon, where Melissa Klein did custom wedding cakes and was asked, and she did them with a biblical flair, always with a biblical context. And she was asked by two women to do one for their wedding. And at the time, it wasn't even legal in Oregon to have a gay wedding. And she said she couldn't do that because of her faith, but directed them somewhere else. She was fined $135,000. Her business was bankrupted. She was ordered by the judge not to speak publicly her beliefs about marriage. That case, we've already been up to the Supreme Court and are back down and on our way back up again. So there's just tons of these cases. The military cases, we've had a ton of military cases. Probably the highlight of the ones right now is the Shields of Strength case. That's Kenny Vaughn's just a great guy. But Shields of Strength, if you haven't seen, are dog tags that these guys in the military have that have a scripture verse on them. And for instance, be strong and courageous, said the Lord, right? And it lays that scripture out. These guys, they get in situations where they so want this. I mean, you can't find really a unit anywhere where they don't have these. Nobody's forced to have them, but it's just the ministry makes them available. They talk about how they look down at that because there's times they're scared. There are times they're tough, and they look down and have that scripture to remind them. Well, I mean, they're everywhere. Well, now there was a complaint by Mikey Weinstein, and the anti-religious guy out in Colorado, and the Army said we're not going to allow anybody to have these anymore. That's just outrageous. It's just a violation of religious freedom. So we're representing Shields of Strength and Kenny Vaughn. We've had a number of chaplain cases in the military. The good news is we've won all of these cases so far, but we're having to fight a lot of them in the military. There are people who want to push religious freedom out of the military. And I'm telling you, religious freedom goes back to George Washington. The very first army he led, the first thing he did is give everybody a Bible and have chaplains, because he understood you're not going to have good soldiers if they can't rely upon their faith. And in fact, one of the briefs we filed in the Supreme Court on one of these cases was a general's brief that was filed by a number of generals. And they said the number one reason why most people join the military is out of their faith. Wow. And so you destroy religious freedom in the military, you will destroy our military. But I look at it as, with what these people are doing for us and our freedoms, the idea that we won't be there for them, they're in a hierarchical structure with a lot of authority. They can't really speak out or speak back, like others can. So we got to come in and stand with them. And so when they say, hey, I need help, it just happened during COVID, the Navy sent out a missive that said, You're not allowed to go to any religious services. Banned every person in the Navy from going to a religious. At the same time, however, you were allowed to have a party at your house with as many people as you wanted. No social distancing, nothing. Well, we were like, that's, we had a number of people in the Navy say, I need your help. I gotta, they're banning me from going to church. One of them was a chaplain. They're banning me to go to church. I'm the chaplain, right? And anyway, needless to say, by the time we were done, that had been reversed. That's now gone. But we were having to fight a lot more of these things than we used to. So there's a lot of variety of cases. I mean, it's hundreds of cases every year. So I would just tell people, look at the website, look at some of the cases. And the thing I would encourage people to do, Steve, because a lot of people are like, well, I'm not a lawyer, thank goodness. What can I do? And I say, well, there's a couple of things you can do. Number one, you can pray. Because these ultimately are spiritual battles, huge spiritual battles. I could tell you story after story after story of what God's done in dramatic ways in cases. And these people are standing alone a lot. So prayer is very, very important. Number two, I'd like, get on, when you go to firstliberty.org, there's a way you can sign up for the First Liberty Insider Alert. Yeah, I mean, sign up because you don't even know how to pray for something if you don't know what's happening. Yeah. So one thing is you'll see things and you'll go, I want to pray for Coach Kennedy. I want to pray for Melissa Klein, who's going into court, about whether her bakery is going to be destroyed, So number one is you'll see things. Number two, though, is you'll begin to see what your rights are and the victories that are occurring. And I want you to be a Paul Revere of sort, right? Mm-hmm. You can be the one to disseminate the information because I think, people are a lot bolder once they understand that what they're doing is okay, that they're winning, that they have freedoms, that don't be, Satan always tries to intimidate us and self-censor. This will change a lot. This will lead to a lot more boldness in the body of Christ of people knowing I have this freedom. I will do these things. And so I would encourage people, pray, educate other people, not that everything you get is something that you necessarily want to share, but you might go, this is a passion of mine. I want to share this with my friends. And then obviously people can support, financially as well. I mean, get involved however the Lord wants you to. I mean, use us as a resource. If you have a question, if you're wondering, can I do this? Any sort of intimidation, don't allow yourself to be intimidated. We want people to do what the Holy Spirit's calling them to do and not to be intimidated because the enemy tries to intimidate them with lies and disinformation, which is always how the enemy works. This country is built on religious freedom, so you have every right to live out your faith and to make a difference with those around you.
Okay. Hey, I want to just jump in here for a second. I think there are maybe 2 people in my location that have logged in, and I think they're eating up bandwidth. So if I could ask those people, they can watch the recording later on, but if you could sign out, I think that might help. That may be why we're a little jumpy here. So Kelly, oh gosh, where was my brain? Oh, I know. Not just about defending cases, but tell people about First Liberty and judges and filling judgeships and so forth. Help people understand what you're doing and the importance of that.
Well, when we, look, our mission is religious freedom. And we were preparing for a Hillary Clinton presidency and how we could advance religious freedom under them. And then this Trump guy won. And we were like, well, we got to reevaluate. So we looked at everything and we thought, you know what? I mean, the greatest opportunity that we see is we immediately noticed there's 130 to 140 federal judicial seats not filled, waiting to be filled by the new president for life. Wow. We thought, you want to have impact, you put good judges on the court, that'll be great for religious freedom. You're not only impacting one case, you're impacting the future of the country for our children and our grandchildren. And so we got involved. We built out a division that really wanted to do heavy research on the judges, because The mistake in the past that the Republicans made was so-and-so is my friend, trust me. And we're like, that's just not sufficient for a lifetime appointment. We need to be looking at people's records and their judicial philosophy to ensure we get the right kind of people. And so we started doing very heavy research. And then add to that, we've already talked about this a little bit though. Think of our model for attorneys. We've got attorneys all over the country. They're at the best law firms in the country. They're the top litigators in the country. They're people who, how do you find, now all of a sudden the president is looking for, how do I fill all these judgeships in all these places all over the country? How do you find a guy who's making $1 to $2 million a year, that's one of the best attorneys in the country, that's going to work for $200,000 a year for the rest of his life as a federal judge? Well, maybe you find somebody that's so committed to the Constitution that they're willing to give their time on a First Liberty case. So our attorneys are the types who are naturally fitted. They're the best, they're brilliant, but they're also willing to serve. And so as we've been filling these seats, we have our attorneys, flooding the zone all over the country, getting federal courts of appeals, federal district court. For instance, I'll give you one. It's a huge difference we're talking about here. Let's take something in California, the Ninth Circuit. It's known as one of the more liberal federal court of appeals in the country, in San Francisco, right? Well, who was the last judge appointed to the Ninth Circuit? It was a guy who's, Harvard Law School, top of his class, very bright, Solicitor General from the state of Montana and Nevada. The guy is so conservative that I would be like a liberal compared to him. His name is Lawrence Van Dyke. And at age 46, he was confirmed 4 or 5 months ago to the Ninth Circuit for the rest of his life. You think that's a change from the liberal Ninth Circuit? Take one of those judges off, put this guy there. And guess what? His first case he ever argued as a young attorney was a First Liberty case. That's a guy we're never going to have to worry about whether he's going to be following the Constitution. He's committed. He's brilliant. He was one of the bigger law firms in the country, and he's had all kinds of public service, but he was willing to forego the money to serve as a judge. And boy, that's changed. And that's what we're doing. We've got over 200 federal judges so far that have been confirmed. There's another 5 in the next week. We hope to get another 50 through this year. And then also something that people will probably see in the news pretty soon, if they haven't already, is the president's about to announce a new list that if he has another chance, this is his Supreme Court list. We've been working heavily with them on this to make sure that they get really solid people. No more surprises. For so many years, it's like they appoint somebody on the Supreme Court and then you get surprised. There's a way to avoid that. You pick people who have already shown what they will do before you even send them there. And there are plenty of those people for the president to put on his list now. And I think you're going to see a really solid list. But I'm encouraged. These are youngest ever appointed, highest credentialed ever appointed, and they're going to be there for life. So this is who our children and our grandchildren, and literally even our great-grandchildren, these are going to be their judges. And so we are changing the future with what we're doing on the judges. If people, by the way, they can go to our website. Judicial nominees is one of the tabs on the bottom. They can look at all the seats, what's happening, who's being appointed, what's going on there to keep up. We keep up with that. And but we have massive amounts of research on everybody because we want to make sure who we're getting, especially on the Supreme Court, very important, but all the judges, because 70, 80 cases a year reach the Supreme Court. The other hundreds of thousands are all decided by those lower judges. So those are just as important. And I don't know how to do this, except I could go through and tell you examples But if people just understood the quality, they would be so excited. I'll give you an example. One guy topped this class from law school, gets out, works one of the biggest law firms in the country, decides he wants to do something a little more important. So he goes to work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutor. He puts away terrorists. He wins an evicting terrorists. Just a great guy. Holder comes in as the new attorney general, pulls him off of some of that work to work on like LGBT issues. And he's like, that's not why I came here. So he leaves. Well, where did he go? He came to work for us. And at age 38 years old, the president picked him to be a federal judge for the rest of his life. And he's now in the court for the rest of his life. So he worked here at First Liberty. Brilliant, committed. He would rather saw his arm off than to ever turn away from the Bible or the Constitution. And he's going to be there as the judge for my great grandchildren. You know, I mean, he's there for a long time as a young person. So just multiply that over and over and over all across the country. The difference we're making for the future is tremendous. And that's why when I talked earlier about the Bladesbird cross case, we would have never won that case and never changed everything away from the hostility to religion approach if we hadn't have changed two of the justices and gotten Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on there, who have been very solid on religious freedom.
And Kavanaugh has some history with First Liberty, correct?
Yeah, I knew him as a young attorney. He donated his time with me on a religious liberty case. He's been a committed guy for religious freedom his entire career. So when he was up, we knew, and we knew he would be solid on religious freedom, and we're able to, to get behind that, and really pleased when he got on the court as far as religious freedom goes. And he's been all the decisions. He's been excellent. And even when the decision was wrong, he's been correct.
Okay. Tell us about, though, one of the things that's come to my mind to recognize is prosecutors and district attorneys and prosecutors. And aren't there not movements to load up those positions with people who aren't going to prosecute cases, that are going to be more liberal? I mean, tell us about how that works, because here you are trying to fill judgeships, but on the other hand, you're fighting the system.
Yeah, the prosecutors that's a political matter, right? That's just a matter of who you elect. And as far as you're talking about these local elections like DAs and local prosecutors. Federal prosecutors are an indirect result of who you elect. Federal prosecutors are appointed by the president. And but typically the lower staff underneath that U.S. attorney are, people who've been there a long time, and they just do prosecution under federal laws. But yeah, what you're talking about is there are people that are trying to destroy the rule of law. And one of the ways they're trying to do it is by having lots of money, because they know that very little money is normally spent on a DA race. So they're pouring in lots of money and backing some candidate who is not going to follow the law. And, you rely upon the district attorney to be somebody who wants to make sure the law is enforced, because that's their job. But the way the system would say is, well, if you don't like what the guy's doing or the gal's doing, then get rid of them. So it's really sad to watch what's happening. I mean, it really is just a broadside attempt to damage the rule of law. And eventually, if you destroy the rule of law and that concept, you end up in raw power. It's bloodthirsty. Whoever has the most, power and violence wins. And we take for granted a lot of these things, like that we pass the election from one person to another in a peaceful manner. That's because the rule of law is kind of something we all assume, but it's really coming under attack in a lot of different ways. It comes under attack when judges, just start making things up. And so that's why we've really been focusing on judges that follow original meaning. And then same with prosecutors. So you have to have prosecutors that will enforce the law, and ones that are not saying I'm refusing to prosecute. But there's prosecutorial discretion. I mean, they can bring whatever criminal actions they want, and that are under the law. And if you don't like the remedy is supposed to be get rid of them, throw them out of office, and get somebody who will enforce the laws.
Okay, so talk to us. We're going to wrap up here in a second. Talk to us about churches and the battles that churches are fighting right now. Of course, here in Los Angeles, we have Grace Community Church and John MacArthur. We've got God Speak out in Thousand Oaks. Up in Santa Clara, I think it's North Valley Baptist Church is in a huge, they've been fined something like $52,000. Tell us your perspective and what's going on specifically these days with churches and COVID.
There's, it's proof of what we've been telling people for years. It's one of the most amazing things, as we, for years have told supporters and others that religious freedom is our first freedom, that if you lose that freedom, you lose all your freedoms. And now what I'm having, we had an event in Colorado that you were there for that event. And I can't tell you, I mean, people came up to me after that and said, you've been telling us, and I believed it, but I'm blown away how it's so obvious now. Because during this pandemic, when you see this attack on freedom, and everybody's like wondering what is going on, right? There's a father being handcuffed in front of his children for throwing a baseball in the park. There's a guy coming off a beach in California all by himself being arrested, because he surfed. And I mean, people are wondering, have we lost our Constitution? And in this battle over freedom, what is the big issue? It's churches. It's religious freedom. And so I think, we tried to be real careful. We knew that it'd be difficult in a pandemic to win the first case ever in a pandemic, because they're going to defer. If you're a judge and you're like, people's lives are at stake, and this government official is saying, we're going to do such and such. So we prayed a lot, and had lots of churches calling us, telling us horrible things were happening, obviously, to them by abusive government officials. And we filed, the first one was on Easter weekend, and we won. We call it the shot heard around the nation, because it was a massive victory in federal court, a restraining order. They had tried to tell the church they could not get together in their parking lot in their cars and have a service. And we won a really strong religious liberty victory, and that was the beginning. We also won a statewide injunction in Kentucky that every church could open in a safe way. We started winning. But then the problem was a lot of crazy lawsuits got filed in places like California that were not necessarily wise, that were not necessarily timed well, or think about what judge you go before and all this. And the losses started happening in California, piling up and creating just chaos out there. And so now the whole nation is somewhat of a mess as to, well, does the government control the church? And you'd have thought no by our wins, but now it's a mixed bag. And so we're literally in a battle right now for whether the government is going to control our churches. And so I think California is a key place. We've got a truck, the First Liberty truck, that's got a studio inside that is literally, as I speak, driving to California, because we're going to be spending about a week out there. Not me necessarily, I'm going to be out there some, but they're going to California they want the whole country to see what's going on. And the first thing they're going to is the rally with Sean Fout, the big rally, a prayer rally, where they're inviting the governor to come down. He obviously needs some prayer. And so we're going to focus on this. But I would just say, look, there's sort of two ways to win this battle. One is the legal arena, and that's going to take a while now because there's a mess. I think the only way, we're praying for the right case and trying to pursue the right cases. We got some cases we're about to file in California on behalf of private Christian schools that are being discriminated against and not being allowed to open up. We've got cases around the country, but California will be a big battle, but something's going to have to make it, of all this stuff around the country, something's got to make it to the Supreme Court. And when it does, then we can finally clean all this up. And I think we can, because I think we've got the justices who will stand for religious freedom. We just they haven't gotten a case yet. They've gotten emergency orders and motions, which they don't like. They haven't gotten a merits case. The other way, though, that not talked about a lot, that the church can win is that the church just stands up together. Because if the church stands together, no politician wants to stand against that. They can throw anybody out of office they want. They can insist that this has gotten out of hand. And I think we're coming to that point where I think people realize that things are subsiding somewhat. And some of these abusive, overreaching power grabs by some of these government officials are not going to be tolerated anymore. And I think if the church all stood together and said, no, this is not acceptable. We're going to be safer with our people than the liquor store that you're saying is fine to visit, or the marijuana dispensary, or the Home Depot, or that we can go down the list. We're going to follow all kinds of guidelines because we care about our people. But you're not going to treat us differently, and you're not going to shut us down, because what we are doing is a fundamental right. If the church stood as a whole, this would be over quickly. And we'll see what happens.
What do you mean for the church to stand together? What does that look like?
Well, it means that everyone across, like, let's say California, stood up and said, this is over. This is over. And here's what we're going to do. And they can't, there's not enough government officials, to overwhelm the church. It's the opposite. Plus, any government, I'm watching a local situation right now with a school district where they tried to bring in just some horrific curriculum through BLM that would teach all these kids things that are crazy. And as soon as the parents found out, oh my gosh, they have lit the place, not literally, they have lit the place on fire. And there are now school board officials who were supporting this that are not supporting this anymore, and they're running for their political life. That's exactly what would happen in California if everybody stood together and said, you're not going to pick us off one at a time. We all have different, beliefs about a lot of different things, but the church will meet, and this will end, and we're standing together to end it now. And I think we're coming to that point. I think that people are insisting upon this, and as soon as one place breaks this, and this is what we found in the other states. Like, we fought our lawsuit in Kentucky on behalf of one church, and we won on behalf of one church. Within a week, every church in the state had been told they were allowed to open, and within days after that, every business had been told. And it's a matter of standing together as a church and supporting one another and speaking out. And I think they're coming close to that point. We'll see. But I think everybody, no matter what, needs to be in prayer, because this battle is very important. Sort of good news, bad news. Good news is, after what we talked about earlier, long term, we are changing religious freedom in a dramatically good way. We are shifting 50 years of bad law, and every American is about to have more religious freedom than they've ever had in their life. Short term, we're in the middle of a very important battle, and we need to pray for a victory, because we can't allow the government to control the church. And that's a battle we're in the middle of right now. So both things going on at the same time. I'm very optimistic long term, but in the short term, we're in the middle of a battle.
Okay, I was talking about this with a friend, and they said, is this the battle? Is this the hill that the church wants to die on? Because they're thinking, a lot of churches are trying to be considerate of their neighborhood and keep good relationships and so forth. And they said, is this the battle? Is this the hill that we want to die on? Is this that hill?
Well, if the church can't meet, they're not the church. The church, the whole meaning of church is ecclesia. It's a gathering together. And the church is not a virtual exercise. And so the church has to meet. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to ignore your circumstances and where you are, But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about outrageous, let me take the one we're about to file in California. What they're saying is, in daycare, you can have 14 children and 2 adults supervising them, and that's okay under COVID-19. But you can't instruct them, because if you instruct them, you're a school, and that's not allowed. Now, that's just complete nonsense, okay? That there is no rational or legal basis for telling a Christian school they can't teach the 14 children that they're in charge of. And so I think in these situations, the church has to stand, or else they're going to cede their freedom of who they are. We talked earlier about separation of church and state. This is the proper biblical understanding, which is God created the church to be the church. He created the state to be the state, the government to be the government. He did not create the government to come in and tell the church how to hold their services. That they are totally out of their sphere, and the church has to stand when that attempt on their authority, their God-given authority, is under attack. They have to stand up and say, no, you have no right here. You will not take over our church. You do not, the government is not in control of my church. The Lord is in control of this church. Now, if they look at the situation and they think in the area that we're in, there's an outbreak, there's danger, there's situation, and they want to, that's fine. But the key is, who is the one that controls the church? And it's that congregation and that pastor. It's not some government official in a basement, issuing an order.
You're asking some pastors to have courage and step up. And there are a lot of pastors, quite honestly, they're going to say what you're asking them to do is political.
Yeah, it's not political at all. Doesn't matter who's in charge. I mean, you've got different ways that people approach this. I mean, take Greg Lowry's church, right? Are they meeting? Yeah, they're meeting. They're meeting under a tent, okay? But they're not being shut down. They're not saying that it's not important that we gather together for the next year. I mean, year and a half. I mean, what they've said in California, if they did, you wouldn't have church for a long time. And so every church, every pastor needs to be faithful with what God's telling them to do. But they just need to be clear. That's never, the right thing to do is not to cede the authority of the church over its own decisions. They might agree with what the government is suggesting in a situation, but what I'm describing in a number of situations there is no rationality. It is abusive. It is from a mindset of either anti-church or one that sees the church as very unimportant to people's lives, which is a lie. And a pastor should understand that. There are real harms occurring because people can't come to church. There are suicides, there's depression, there's drug abuse, there's family destruction, there's we go on and on and on. There's all kinds of real harm occurring when people aren't gathering together. And so the pastor has a responsibility to lead the church and the elders too, the leadership of the church. But the church needs to stand together. They need to support one another. Everybody doesn't have to do the right thing, but everybody has to stand up and make clear who the authority is for the church. The authority for the church is Jesus Christ, not some government official, a mayor, a county official. You want to respect those people. We want to defer to authority, but there is a line of authority over who controls what, and the church is not controlled by our government.
I mean, I could go on for a long time with you, but let's wrap here. You spoke earlier about the Supreme Court. Just talk to us about the importance of the upcoming election and what that could mean for the Supreme Court in the future.
Yeah, it's a big deal for judges on the federal level. I think, you've had the current administration did something that has never really been done before, that the candidate ran on how he was going to pick judges.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was, instead of the way that everybody's always done it, which is sort of politics, right? It's, hey, Senator, my brother, he's a lawyer and I helped you get in office, so why don't you put him on the court? That's kind of how things work. And this administration said, no, we're going to pick by judicial philosophy, credentials, et cetera. And it's been very different. If people want to continue that approach, in this case, the Trump administration has been doing that. You'll probably get that approach. If people want to throw that approach over and go back to the old approach, because Biden has not talked about changing any from that, you'll get probably the approach that has been done before that. It's a huge difference in the types of judges that'll be put on the court. Right now, the Trump administration has done 201 judges that have been confirmed for life, which is a huge number. Probably another 50 or so this year is my guess. Let's take as an example what we've already talked about, the Ninth Circuit. Always been a very liberal federal court of appeals. Used to be the most liberal in the country. Not so much anymore, because the Trump administration has replaced a number of those. If President Trump were to be reelected, within a year, the Ninth Circuit will be controlled by conservatives. California will be under a federal court of appeals that is conservative. That's a big change. Okay, so big difference in what you want and who you would vote for if that's one of your issues. But I would stress also, Steve, that people also are paying attention this time to their mayors, to their county commissioners, to their governors, because these are people that are affecting their lives now, and they need to be knowledgeable and vote on those. And we have a resource on our website on churches and elections, what's the law, that point out that really churches can do and should do a lot with regard to elections. The reason is not because they're being political, they're not being political at all. It's because the job of a pastor is to equip the saints to represent Christ in every area of society. That includes the voting booth. So we've got a resource that says, what is it that the IRS says you can't do? And it's basically it's two things that no church wants to do. You can't, as a 501c3 entity, endorse one candidate over another. I don't know any churches that want to do that. You can't, number two, use church resources as a 501c3 entity to support one candidate over another with your resources. Not seeing a lot of churches that want to open their church coffers to politicians, okay? So what is it you can do? Can the pastor speak to the issues of the day biblically? Absolutely. Can the pastor in their personal capacity, or anybody in the church, get involved in a campaign? Yeah, the pastor can be the campaign chairman if they want to. They're a citizen. Can the church have voter registration to make sure their people are registered? Absolutely. Can they encourage everybody in their church to vote? Absolutely. One of the reasons I wouldn't be a pastor very long is, if I were a pastor, I would tell people in my church, it's a biblical duty for you to go and take Christ in the voting booth. I can't see who you vote for, and I necessarily wouldn't want to see you vote for, but I can check the records and find out if you voted. And anybody who doesn't vote is going to get a visit from me after the election and ask why you're not being a steward of what God has given you. So you can have voters guides, nonpartisan voters guides in the church, so people can at least know where do these candidates stand on the issue, so I can make my decision. You can invite the candidates to a local race like the mayor or whatever. Say, we're inviting you to come. We're having a forum at our church. If you invite every candidate in that race, if just one shows up, you've done your duty. The point is, the church can speak to these issues and should be a leader speaking to the issues. And we've got a little one-pager on that. They should encourage their people to vote. They should encourage them to vote in a biblical manner. And if that happened, wow. I mean, things would really change in the way our country was run. And the future leaders of our country would come out of the churches. And that's how our founders really intended it. They would actually, that's how they would find good candidates. They would look through the church and go, who, if proven themselves to be leaders within the church. And they'd say, those are good and honorable people that we will put up for public service. And
Okay.
that's what should happen.
So people can go to firstliberty.org and find all kinds of helps, including this one sheet and all kinds of information.
Right. And if they can't find something, they can just send us an email or call us, and we're happy to get it to them.
Okay. And you know what? Out of this, I'm hoping that some people run for school board.
Absolutely.
And run for city council and our supervisor. They need to stop complaining about the school board, and they need to run for the school board.
I had this happen, Steve. I spoke at a church a few years ago, and I came back 3 years later, and I found out that the associate, and I didn't even talk about running for office or anything. I just talked about, religious freedom. But God was speaking to people in ways I didn't know. So I came back. The associate pastor is now a state representative, and one of the other people in the church is now in the city council. And I thought, I love it. Awesome. That's how we change things. We get people who know God's truth in those positions to bring those biblical values to bear.
Okay. Well, look, I want to encourage folks to go to firstliberty.org, learn more about what you're doing, support what you're doing. You have a position, God's given you a position where you can do some powerful things for our nation. And Kelly, every time I end these, I always do it like this. Heavenly Father, I pray for Kelly today. I pray for First Liberty, for the folks that work there. I thank you for, and I pray for the attorneys around the country that are assisting them. Give First Liberty great wisdom and discernment in terms of what cases to take on and how to approach them. Just pray that a blessing on Kelly, his family, and all those that work with First Liberty. And I pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Kelly, I want to thank you for your time today, bud, and God's blessings on you. We'll be continuing to pray for you and your work. Thanks so much.
You too, Steve.
All right,
God bless you.